Good morning, everyone. Apologies for the couple of minutes delay, and thank you all for joining us this morning or evening, depending on where you are, for Right to Freedom's webinar on Bangladesh's elections, overcoming the integrity deficit. This is the fourth such event that Right to Freedom has organized with support from the National Endowment for Democracy. To start, I'd like to invite our president, Ambassador William Milam, to say a few words. Ambassador Milam, over to you.
Thank you, John. I apologize. It's not my fault. I want to make that clear that I'm not visible. Um, Something is misfunctioning in our Zoom system, I think, or maybe it just doesn't like me. But in any case, I'm happy to be here, whether you can see me or not, because I'm really interested in what's going to be said. This is the uh, second or third webinar that we have held, the Right to Freedom. And the Right to Freedom, I'll just go wax a little bit eloquent and say that it's a very new organization. We've only been in the business for about this is November, so about almost a year, but officially, although we did we were created a couple of years ago, but we weren't doing much. But we now are working with the assistance of the National Endowment for Democracy, which has helped a lot, and I want to express my appreciation to them, to that organization, which has been extremely helpful and kind. But we've been working on different kinds of events, and we've been working on the issues involved in the problems with democracy, human rights that Bangladesh is having. And we've been trying to find speakers and other ways to help overcome those issues that Bangladesh is having. So, and it's been quite an interesting journey, I might add, and it's not over, I think. But this is going to be a real peak for me because we're having a number of speakers who I have not heard before and who I'm very anxious to hear. I might add just one more point before I come to let you listen to the people who really know what they're talking about. But I've been reading the papers this morning and yesterday, and the problems that we're seeing in Bangladesh of what seems to be a crackdown on the opposition, and certainly a certain number of people have been put into prison or a jail, I guess I should say, rather than prison, is a good way of thinking, at least introducing our subject today, which is the challenges of election integrity. Although I don't totally understand what that covers, it has certainly seems to be quite closely related to what we're going to discuss today. So I welcome you all, you who are viewing and you who are speaking, to the event that will start right away, and I will hand the parole, the microphone, if that is what we say, back over to John. Thank you, and welcome again.
Great, thanks, Bill. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is John Danilowitz. I'm a director of Right to Freedom. Let me start by just going over some of the administrative arrangements for today's session. First, we are planning to go for about an hour and a half. And after each of our panelists has a chance to speak, we'll have a question and answer period. You'll see on the bottom of the screen that there's a question and answer button. Feel free to put in your question and we will answer those at the appropriate time. If you wish to remain anonymous in asking a question, that's certainly fine, understanding the situation in Bangladesh. However, if you do want to identify yourself and your organization, please feel free to do so, and we'll include that with your question. You should be aware that this session is being broadcast live on Facebook, and it's also being recorded. We will later post the video on Facebook and on YouTube. And then before turning to our first speaker, Antonio Spinelli, I want to note that Antonio is joining us from Australia, where it's very late or very early, depending on your perspective. So Antonio will be leaving us before the end of the session, before question and answers. But if he leaves abruptly, it's not a walkout that he's staging. So I just wanted to be clear on that. Our 5 panelists have all joined us. I will announce that, or I will recognize them in turn as they were listed on the invitation, and each will speak for about 10 minutes. And then, as I said, we'll hold questions for the end. So our first speaker today is Antonio Spinelli. We're very fortunate to have Antonio with us. He's a senior advisor for electoral processes for the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance's IDEA, Asia and Pacific Regional Program. Antonio is currently seconded to the Australian Election Commission, where he is responsible for shaping both strategic and operational thinking, bringing real-world experience from a variety of international electoral environments. Prior to joining the Asia and Pacific Regional Program in Canberra, Antonio managed International Ideas Office and programs in Nepal and South Asia, supporting the Institute's electoral processes, local governance, citizen engagement, and political representation and participation initiatives in this region. So Antonio, without further ado, over to you.
Thank you so much, John, and distinguished participants. On behalf of International IDEA, I would like to thank the Right to Freedom for the invitation and opportunity to speak at this event. I worked twice in Bangladesh. In 2008, I was in Dhaka for an assessment for the UN, an assessment of the photographic voter registration project. It was very interesting. And more recently, in last February, I was for about a month in Dhaka to, again, assess possible electoral assistance to the Election Commission of Bangladesh for the forthcoming elections, together between IDEA and UNDP. Unfortunately, the conditions didn't allow for the assistance to materialize. Moving to my presentation, I must say that, with only a few months left to the January 24 elections, concerns about its expected levels of integrity, inclusion, voter participation, safety, credibility, and legitimacy are rightly so steadily growing. And regrettably, changes to electoral integrity are not something new to Bangladesh. Despite several credible elections that were consecutively held between 1991 and 2008, electoral integrity started to decline in 2014 to further deteriorated in 2018. So these two last cycle of elections lacked a level playing field, transparency, fairness, and they were characterized by multiple irregularities, by allegations of widespread fraud and intimidation, by low levels of voter turnout, restricted electoral observation, and by the worst electoral violence that the country experienced since the start of its democratization process in 1991. And so, although its political system and the legal framework provide for elections to be held regularly, Bangladesh electoral processes reveal inherent fragility and remain tenaciously beset by some systemic deficiencies. So left unaddressed, one election to the next, these deficiencies have led to a sharp decline in public confidence in the government's ability to hold credible and competitive elections. And despite the existence of a constitutionally independent electoral management body, the Election Commission is perceived and accused to lack independence. And so no matter if real or just perceived, the lack of independence has seriously tarnished the Commission's reputation. So looking at the forthcoming election, there are several reasons to be concerned. Should it lack basic levels of integrity and credibility, the country could be facing another 5 years of deeply polarized, confrontational, acrimonious, and often violent politics. And in turn, the protracted political stalemate could continue to have serious economic and social repercussions in the country, with the potential of a further democratic setback that both Bangladesh and its people can and no longer want to afford. So considering that this stalemate persisting since 2008, discussion about electoral reform are also nothing new to the country. There have been repeated assessments, and they were followed by repeated calls for electoral reforms, suggesting ways to enhance the integrity of elections, legally, procedurally, operationally, as well ways to make them more independently and professionally managed. So yet, we have only little more than 2 months left to the scheduled date. So the 2024 election will be delivered without any substantial reform. So as the key causes for electoral integrity deficit have been left unaddressed, it is difficult to imagine that the next election, one, will be meeting acceptable integrity standards, and two, its outcome will be credible and thus broadly trusted and accepted by all stakeholders. So unless both the political and electoral dimensions of unavoidable reforms are addressed, a credible and trusted electoral system cannot be established. So the key question to be answered at this event is, how could Bangladesh electoral deficit be possibly overcome? Regrettably, in the current state of political affairs, there are not too many options on the table. One of the few, if not the only, would be that of a political reset, considering that the comprehensive overhaul of the country political electoral systems would require to break with the present political deadlock, with the legacy of this deadlock. So first and foremost, before any technical reform can be defined, agreed upon and implemented, overcoming Bangladesh election integrity deficit requires political maturity and committed action by the contending political actors. As elections are partly political and partly technical processes, addressing any major technical process that is causing electoral deficiencies requires political will, political compromise, and political consensus. Therefore, seeking to reform elections in isolation from the broader political ecosystem is going to be ineffective, short-lived, and probably meaningless. And so with these considerations in mind, we can assume that no comprehensive, credible, and actionable reform is possible in Bangladesh unless the main political parties set the differences aside once for all and engage in genuine dialogue and negotiations. They shift the priority from seeking to retain or grab political power to instead promote a culture of cooperation and compromise for the good of the nation and the good of its people. And they reach a consensus of what needs to happen to overcome the multiple long-standing and deeply rooted deficiencies that are marring the integrity of election in Bangladesh. So while the political part is undeniably the hardest to overcome, political will, consensus, and compromise are prerequisites that would pave the way to viable legal and technical reform. So proposed reforms have been very thoroughly debated and also are nothing new, but they could include, for example, if the political will and compromise, etc., was to be found, ensuring greater independence of the election commission from political influence. This could be addressed in two ways. First, improving the structural independence of the Electoral Commission by strengthening the legal framework to provide more safeguard for its autonomy. And second, by enhancing what we call the idea behavioral independence. So by instilling in the EC an ethical culture of fearless independence, in that they do not bend in their behavior to any governmental, political, or any other partisan influences. It could be to reduce the occurrence of irregularities in voting and counting processes by assisting the EC to both enhance the professional skills for the unintentional irregularities of the staff or the ethical behavior of the staff for deliberate irregularities. Establish a robust code of conduct, nothing new. Ensure transparent campaign financing laws that reduce the influence of money in politics and ensure a level playing field for all parties. Strengthen the judiciary independence to ensure that the electoral disputes are resolved impartially and timely. Guarantee media freedom and access, promote a diverse media landscape to provide a platform for all political perspectives. Take measures to minimize political violence and ensure the safety of voters, candidates, and election observers during the elections. Encourage civic engagement and civil society participation in monitoring and advocating for monitor elections and advocating for electoral integrity. Promote civic education to empower citizens to participate in the process, the democratic process, to understand their rights and make an informed choice. Engage in public awareness campaigns to rebuild public trust in the electoral system that has been lost in the AC, and to encourage citizens to actively participate in elections. And finally, seek international assistance to help ensure that the electoral processes meet international standards. And so for all these reforms to happen, to conclude, it may be necessary, to draw a line in the current political situation, the current political system, and allow all the stakeholders, the government, the political parties, the civil society, and international actors to collaborate in the definition and implementation of an electoral reform roadmap, and together work towards the achievement of a shared vision of democratic elections that in Bangladesh that enjoy high levels of integrity and also high levels of public trust. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Antonio, and thanks for kicking off today's discussion so well. And as noted before, we won't take it personally when you soon disappear. Just a reminder to all of the attendees that if you have questions for the panelists, please use the Q&A function on your screen, and we'll collect and ask the questions later. It's now my pleasure to turn to Brigadier General Retired Dr. Shaukat Hussain, who's an old friend from my time in Dhaka. So it's good to see you, sir. Brigadier Shaukat was commissioned in the Pakistan Army in 1966 from the Pakistan Military Academy at Kabul. He joined the Bangladesh Army in 1972 following the country's independence. He was appointed as a commissioner in the Election Commission following the 2006-2008 political crisis, and he served on the Election Commission until 2012. He has written extensively on national and international issues in local, international newspapers and journals focusing on strategic issues. So without further ado, Brigadier Shaukat, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me in such a gathering where I find at least some of the faces that I have known. I was just trying to recollect if I have met Antonio in 2008 or sometime when IDSO was working, in fact, not working, in fact, was trying to assess the function of the Election Commission of Bangladesh. And while later on doing my PhD, I have consulted a lot of their publications, which are probably recorded in my thesis. Thank you very much. Thank you once again. And the first time that I have joined you, and I was eager to see Excellency Mr. Milam. I have happened to meet him when he was in Dhaka as the ambassador, US ambassador, and I had the opportunity of playing once or twice with him in the golf course. Thank you very much. Thank you for once again, Mr. Antonio, setting the tone. And my compliments to all those who have joined to listen to me and us. And I hope that I can contribute what you wanted to from me. I wanted to share the screen, but I think better not required. So therefore, my discussion would not follow the way that I wanted to structure, but then let me spell out what I have in my experience and what I am saying now. The first of all, that we are talking about the integrity of elections. Well, there's a theory of integrity of elections all over, but the simple thing, the election integrity, as far as I'm concerned, you can measure by three particular things. One, is it participatory? Is the elections participatory? Are all the parties which are supposed to participate, have they participated? Particularly, to me, in my theory, is the parties which can form or have the ability to form the next government. That means the parties which have a larger reach all over the country. If they have participated, or whether they have not participated. Second is the election atmosphere was conducive for a free, fair, and collective election or not. And third, could the voters participate? That's one of the main, I believe, is the criteria, if I may call, the integrity of election. Who decides and how do you measure the integrity of election? If the voters are satisfied, the voters have participated, and the voter could freely access to the voting center and going back home, particularly countries like ours. So therefore, to me, in the main frame, if I say, these are the three things on which let us see what happening in Bangladesh. I would say particularly after 2008 election. Since I was a member of that election commission, so my saying may not look very palatable, but I can only say that that election was probably could have been served as a benchmark. Unfortunately, that was not. So what we see, if we now dissect the elections after 2008, no repetition is required because you all know 2014. So if you measure that integrity, the tools that I have talked about, 2014 election was nothing but a black chapter in the political, I would say, democratic electoral system all over the world. Because I have not found, I tried to find that more than half of the legislative assembly, the National Assembly has been elected without even having one single vote. That means 153 were elected unopposed. Is unopposed election illegal? No. Is it immoral? Yes. Because when in our law, you can be elected unopposed. There's no limit given. For 5 or for 3 or for 2 or for 6, how many constituencies you think should be sort of taken as unopposed? 153. It could have been 300 because we have 300 constituencies now in our country. I have not found any parallel anywhere in the world where democracy prevails or democratic elections takes place. So why that happened? Because two things. One is the larger parties were not participating in the election because they thought that elections under the political government in the past has not been acceptable to the voters, nor acceptable outside. It lacked all kind of, or it had all kind of deficiency, integrated deficiency that you can measure. Obviously, Antonio can talk about. Therefore, there was a system which was brought after a lot of bloodshed, and that was known as caretaker government, which was supposed to be neutral government. If you look at the history of Bangladesh parliamentary election, so far 11 parliamentary elections have been held. Only 4 elections which were held under the caretaker government, which was acceptable to great extent to all the political parties, though the losing party has always talked about manipulation. It is because that is what is the culture here we have. But internationally, it was accepted to be a better election than what it was in Bangladesh in the past history. Therefore, the conclusion that all of us we have 2 very prominent gentlemen here, Mr. Nurul Kabir and Dr. Ali Riaz. They would suffice me or support me saying that except those 4 elections, so far no other election has been accepted as it is, and no other election had come as per the measurement of the integrity of the election, minimum integrity of the election. Now, what is going to happen? Why it is so? And 2014, I've talked about 2018 was last chance for an inclusive election. And the present government, present setup assured that there will be free, fair, and participatory election. Participatory it was, but it was no way free and fair election. It is marred with the term as the elections held at night. That means in many constituencies, the ballot paper was stuffed at night, and the election was almost over in the morning. And this is not what I am saying. This is not what I am saying. I am just quoting from even the Chief Election Commissioner who was there on that election. Mr. Nurul Huda has been telling time and again. And there's a book one of those participants, or one of those members of the Election Commission wrote, and he wrote very vividly. So therefore, it was participatory, all right, but it was not fair at all. Over 237, I believe, was the government party poll, and the rest was distributed among others. So that election was not at all acceptable to the people because it was marred with all kind of corruption, and the candidates were beaten. They're all law and order situation. Nobody controlled, and it didn't come up. Now, today, what has happened? In 15 years of the same government staying through this, I would say, skewed election. In fact, and according to Ali Riaz having hybrid government, everything has been politicized. Every strata of the administration has been politicized. And even the election commission do not know what to do with the present one. Past election commissions have been marred with the connotation that they were also part of the government. And this present election government, I'm afraid, they're also walking almost at the same path. And if they have to hold election as per the constitution, as it is today, it's very difficult. It's very difficult in Bangladesh to hold election as per the constitution when 300 member parliament alive, politically alive, and the government stays because each of the government officials, more or less, if not 100%, 90% have been politicized, including law enforcing agencies. Therefore, when election commission holds election, they need about 1.2 million people to conduct the election in the field. And they are nobody other than the government employees and the law enforcing agencies, those who have more allegiance to the government machineries, to the political machineries, to the ruling parties than to the election commission or the electoral system. So that's what it is. So therefore, in Bangladesh, under the present circumstances, no election could be claimed to have any electoral integrity. And it's going to be business as usual, I believe. we are already seeing the situation which is almost getting worse or would get rather worse day after day. The problem where it is why I'm saying that 1.2 million government officials and the law enforcing agencies required who are totally politicized in this last 15 years. If I see the pattern of now being the key administration being placed in the field who would conduct the election, they most of them have 15 to 17 years of service. That means they have they've been growing up with this the regime that we have. And then the key figure in Bangladesh electoral system, I'm sure I didn't go through that because taking it that every one of you know that we are fast past the post system and the law gives the enough. In fact, when the schedule is declared, it's not election commission, but the appointees as returning officer, presiding officer on the field who are the main actors in that time. And unfortunately, our returning officers are all the district head, administrative head, known as deputy commissioner. In British time, they were known as DM. And if not all, I would say 99.9% is politicized. Therefore,
Brigadier, could I ask you to wrap up your introductory comments?
yes,
in the next minute or so? Great,
I'm
thanks.
just wrapping up. So therefore, expecting a free, fair, and participatory election in that sense, as it is today, is very difficult in Bangladesh. And I don't see the next election, if it is held under such circumstances, is going to be participatory, or it will have quote unquote minimum of voting integrity or electoral integrity. Thank you.
Thank you, Brigadier. And your intervention has provoked a number of questions, which we'll get to later. For those of you who are attending, who are raising your hands, we're not going to be recognizing you individually to speak. If you have a question for one of our panelists, please write it in the Q&A box and we'll get to it. I'll now turn to Nurul Kabir, who's a friend of Right to Freedom, a previous attendee at one of our programs, and a colleague from my time in Dhaka as well. So it's good to see you again, sir. Nurul Kabir, as most of you know, is the editor of New Age, one of Bangladesh's most outspoken newspapers, known for its anti-establishment editorial policy. He is also the editor of the Bengali weekly Budbar. Nurul Kabir is widely respected for his upright journalism and bold political views. He's a prolific author, having written several highly regarded books, published numerous essays, both at home and abroad, and presented many papers at regional, national, and international conferences. Right to Freedom is very happy to welcome you back. So over to you, sir.
Thank you so much. Honorable Chair, panelists, and the audience. I'll be very brief. So that we have already have two very important discussions who have genuinely pointed out, one on the theoretical level, that what makes good elections, what are the democracy deficits that there in Bangladesh, and the second speaker has pointed out the practical situations that prevailing in Bangladesh for more than a decade or so. So it's now time to deal with the question, what is to be done next? According to the first speaker, which I agree with him, that these are the things that need to be in place for good elections, and we have nothing at the moment in Bangladesh. Second is, the regime in place have amply displayed by holding two previous elections under their control, that people couldn't vote. That the minimum thing, that right to franchise, it didn't happen. And then we have seen already, all of us, entire opposition political camps, irrespective of their political, ideological orientations, most part of the intelligentsia And people in general have been desperate to make sure that next election becomes a good, inclusive, free and fair elections. Even the last week, the preceding 2-3 days, as a citizen and as a journalist, I can tell you that such huge number of people gathered in Dhaka, coming from different districts and demanding that they need and they want and they desire a good elections is unprecedented. Of course, in the past decades, people of Bangladesh, different political parties have demanded and took to the street for good elections. But the number of people this time the opposition could gather is almost unprecedented. If the voice of the people has anything to do with it, in an elections under a neutral administration, the opposition has already displayed it. On the other hand, government has also clearly displayed the fact that it doesn't have any intention to comply with the demands of the people. And they have so far, for the last 10-12 years, have attached no importance to the demands made by the people and the opposition political parties. Rather, what I'm worried of, I can see very well from the past experiences of Bangladesh's politics. So far, for the last few years, so far the political movement, mass movement for democratic elections has been peaceful, primarily due to the restraint exercised by the opposition parties. Because the ruling parties and its members of the alliance have consistently been provoking the opposition to engage in clashes, because this is once again, we have never seen that whenever an opposition party comes up with a freedom of agitation or protest, that the ruling party almost side by side the venue of the opposition in the name of peace rallies, they have come to the street. This is a clear provocation that one doesn't need to be a rocket scientist to understand. And even verbally, not by other gestures, when thousands of people are taking to the street, the ruling party leaders have been telling people that these are not the movements. BNP or other opposition parties are not capable of conducting any movement. Why? What is a movement then called? Not just gathering thousands of millions of people and raising the demands. In their psychology, no. Until and unless, as they did for a caretaker government, some people are killed, violence is introduced, and administration is collapsed, everything is destructive. Is it called movement? But exactly that is what the ruling party leaders have been mentioning clearly, very clearly, for the last few months. And then came the 28th of October. We can see by the newspaper reports, by our personal knowledge, that this violence the source of this violence also government provocation. At a particular point of the people's gathering, some particular police officers who are not known for good behaviors just arrived and the trouble started. So under these circumstances, we can see that the incumbents have no commitment to good elections, let alone the growth of a sound democratic process, which is a very comprehensive one, in which election is only a part. The Election Commission, which is the key element of conducting elections, has many times displayed their commitment, lack of commitment to the inclusive elections and allegiance to the government, because at one point even they have surrendered some power. Election Commission has surrendered some power, which was provided them with a law. They have surrendered it to the government. Third is the political course that is likely to take. As we understand, the incumbents have done so many bad things in the past. It's very difficult for them to leave power because the standard they have set to behave with the opposition and other independent bodies, including intelligentsia. So Awami League knows pretty well that they leave power if they cannot retain power, and if they are treated by the standard they have so far set, they will be in trouble in the future. So they have no reason so far, except for the defining public pressure and support of the international forces to step down. But with them in power, one cannot expect a good elections. What happens in these kinds of situations? The state power decides. But as Brigadier Shekhawat has already pointed out, I will just mention in support of his observation that entire state organs have been politicized. I have no problem with the politicization because politicization is a very important thing. Politicization makes a state rather stronger. Politicization on the partisan line is the important. So entire state machinery in police, civil administration, election commission, if they are politicized on the partisan line, if they are a party to the crimes, political and otherwise, to the crimes conducted by the government, they cannot simply help a sound democratic process to start with a good elections. For that to happen, in fact, Bangladesh needs serious democratic reforms, legal, political, as well as administrative reforms for the democracy to start. Now, the last point that I'm trying to make is, so it is only sane, it would be only sane to expect that under these circumstances, when there is a serious stalemate, there should be dialogue between the contending parties. But this is not only the contending political parties for power. There are other stakeholders in the society who have suffered, who have desired democracy, who have been committed to democratic causes. So for a greater democratic reforms and a good elections, a process of dialogue between all the stakeholders are needed. But the time is very short. The government has spent unnecessarily, I must say, believing that they will be able to retain power this time, which I still think is impossible. If they try to do, there will be a lot of violence, and which will not be good for any of the parties involved, including citizens. But I would say government should listen to the voice of the people, should hear the, what should I say, take the desires of the people and the political parties a little seriously, and even they also should give a serious consideration to the democratic forces around the world, who doesn't perhaps want to see a repetition of what had happened in 2014 and 2018. So either there's a comprehensive dialogue between the stakeholders, or a violent end of the existing authoritarian regime. I do not see personally any other alternative here. So I would only, through this meeting, I can only request, urge from the core of my heart that the stakeholders will give a second thought and reach a consensus and take legal, political, and other necessary steps that really makes a good election, to happen a good elections. The last point is, interestingly, almost every stakeholders know how a good elections are being taken place. Even our prime minister, whose premiership is not politically legitimate, though, a few days earlier said, asked others not to teach her how to conduct good elections. I trust them. I trust her. I've written an editorial too. So, dear Prime Minister, we know that you know how to conduct a good elections. Important is you do it. Make necessary arrangements. We have our experiences, rules are being set down, examples are being there across the world, how to conduct a good elections. Please do it. But apparently she's reluctant to do that. So we have to help her make the elections to happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Nurul. It's now my pleasure to introduce Jeffrey Van Ness. Jeffrey is currently the managing partner at Compass Point Logistics, LLC. He is an international development professional with more than 20 years of experience working for nonprofit organizations, the U.S. government, and intergovernmental organizations promoting civil society, political processes, and good governance in developing countries. Jeffrey served previously as a resident country director for the International Republican Institute in Bangladesh and East Timor, and as a democracy and governance advisor for USAID in Washington, D.C. and Dhaka. So Jeffrey, from your mountaintop in the Shenandoah, please share your views with us.
Thank you. Happy to be part of this distinguished panel and to have such a distinguished audience there. I probably are speaking with the least amount of moral authority on this panel, but I will try to make up with it with some bold statements. And I want to start off by saying that when we talk about election integrity in Bangladesh, I think we already start off losing. I've been listening and thinking, can we tell the difference about what we're saying here in 2023 versus what we would have said 5 years ago and what we would have said 10 years ago? And what, unfortunately, we might be saying 5 years into the future. As Antonio, as Brigadier Shekhawat said, and as Mr. Kabir, indicated, that the conditions aren't there to have a free, fair, participatory, inclusive election in just 3 months from now. We know that elections isn't a single day. It's not an event. It's a process, and it's a process that takes place in a context. So when I was at USAID, I often explained to stakeholders and embassies that even if you had a magic wand, because the question would be, what do we need to do to have a free and fair election? Well, even with a magic wand, you can't erase the context and the climate. Even if we got tomorrow had the dialogue that we were looking for, even if we had changes in the laws and the legal structures that accommodates everyone's wishes, if it happened tomorrow, it can't erase what's taken place over the last 5 years and 10 years in there. It would probably be a good thing, but the scene is already set for this 2014 election, and I strongly think that there is a misplaced emphasis on elections. It's what I used to do for a living. I absolutely believe that elections are important. Election integrity is important. They're very important to Bangladeshis who have had, when I was there for the end of the state of emergency in the 2018 election, it's always wonderful to see how celebratory these days were, how participatory they were. Bangladeshis, like all of us, have the right to choose our own representatives. It's a fundamental human right. It's in the constitution of Bangladesh. They're absolutely important, but I think we would do better to recognize that elections are important, not because they're the end point, but because they are a beginning. They're the beginning of what comes next. And democracies don't hold elections so that political parties can divide up power amongst themselves. Democracies hold elections so that the people can decide who's going to have to be responsible for solving problems. And try not to quote me out of context, but I'm going to say that Bangladesh doesn't need a free and fair election in January 2024. I hope that got your attention. We've already seen that. We've been down that road. As my previous panelists have said, that election in 2008 was pretty good. I mean, I know the international observers labeled it very credible. I was the country director for the International Republican Institute. I'd been there 2 years at that point, and in IRI's report, it was written that called the election a timely and critical step forward for Bangladesh's democracy, where the results of the election accurately reflected the collective will of the Bangladeshi people and were conducted in a comprehensive and fair electoral environment, free of irregularities, serious enough to question the outcome. Brigadier Shekhawat talked about 2008, and then he said 2014 things had changed. Well, what happened? Well, it didn't take 5 years to see that change. Pretty soon after that ninth parliament was seated, after what, for shorthand, I'll call that free and fair election, the opposition started boycotting their seats in parliament for a variety of reasons. Changes were made in the constitution in their absence, which further prolonged the antagonism. And in fact, less than a year after this democratic election, the democratically elected Awami League government was essentially practicing one-party rule by default. That's the start of the situation we're in now. This situation that we are in now in 2023 started very shortly after a free and fair election, one that resembles an election that we're all sitting here asking for right now. I do want to differ with Mr. Kabir when he says that people know what a good election looks like. My experience has been when I asked Bangladeshi political leaders who have asked for a free and fair election, what does that mean? They have difficulty coming up with a definition, and simplifying it. When I ask them, well, how will we know if it was a free or fair election? The answer is almost universally, if we win, it was a free and fair election. If we don't, there must have been irregularities. It wasn't free and fair. This is unfortunate that this is the view, and it's impossible to go into election and changing those views. Okay, all right. That's not particularly helpful, but what I do want to do, instead of talking about election integrity, is think not about election day or the event, but propose that we start talking about a different standard, one that we can possibly do better against. And I'm not discounting the importance of the rule of law, the freedom of expression, the rights of the people, the laws of the land. And yes, international election observers are going to come and go in January 2014, and they're probably not going to tell us anything that we don't already know better than them. But if we define integrity in terms of how well the election serves its purpose, then we can do better. Now, I propose that the purpose of an election isn't to cast votes and to count them accurately, etc. I'm being simplistic. But I think we can judge the quality on the election on whether it succeeds in producing a government and an opposition willing to work together to address the concerns of the Bangladeshi people. They don't necessarily have to agree with each other. They don't necessarily have to agree on solutions. They can be adversarial. That's the meaning of opposition. But they do have to work together. This buys us a little bit more time. It means that we aren't going to be able to talk about the integrity of the election on election day. We have to wait and to see what becomes of the parliament, in this case, that it produces. Does it produce a parliament that's going to work and continue working for the full tenure of the members of parliament that were elected? So in 2008, I talked about that free and fair election, but in hindsight, 15 years down the road, without questioning the technical competence of those who conducted that election and the spirit in which it was conducted, at the time I thought it worked. I now see it didn't, because the results didn't stick. The people who were elected were unable to work together, and it hurt the Bangladeshi people. And I think that when we talk about election integrity, yes, the process is important, but I think the result that we end up with and have to live with for the next 5 years is something we need to be continually evaluating on an ongoing basis before we can talk about how well that 2024 election went. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Jeff, and thanks for those provocative thoughts, which I'm sure will provoke some questions as well. Last and certainly not least, I'd like to recognize Professor Ali Riaz, Distinguished Professor, the Department of Politics and Government at Illinois State University. Professor Riaz previously held the Thomas E. Imerman Professorship. His research interests include democratization, violent extremism, political Islam, South Asian politics, and of course, Bangladeshi politics. He's held the University Professor designation and was chair of the Department of Politics at Illinois State University. He's a non-resident senior fellow of the Atlantic Council and currently the president of the American Institute of Bangladesh Studies. So over to you, Dr. Riaz.
Thank you, John. This has been an excellent last hour listening to such esteemed colleague who have extensive experience of conducting and supervising elections as well as being in Bangladesh. One thing that is evident in this panel, that everyone at some point or other have been engaged in electoral process in Bangladesh as an observer or as someone who facilitated or in some ways or other. Today, what I'm going to talk, and 3 things that I would like to highlight, and some of the things particularly thanks to Jeff Van Ness for bringing up in his last conversation. Let me tell you what are the 3 things that I'm going to talk about. The first thing is what exactly is electoral integrity that we are talking about, or at least in my judgment, what we should be talking about. What are the challenges of electoral integrity in case of Bangladesh that we witness? And the third point is what is the current situation going forward to the 2024 election? To me, then I guess in this respect, I am going to somewhat disagree with Jeff Van Ness. Credibility, for a credible election, when we are talking about electoral integrity, I see 4 things that are essential for electoral integrity, irrespective of the result. And here I'm a process guy. I'm insisting on the process on 4 elements that needs to be looked into. And in any case, whether in case of Bangladesh or Nepal or for that matter in the United States, that to the principal element of the electoral process or the integrity are 4 things: are inclusiveness, transparency, accountability, and competitiveness. Why am I insisting on these things? Because these four things, when we are talking about inclusiveness, I'm not talking about the political parties, just by the fact one of our speakers have insisted on this, Brigadier Shekhawat, about the participatory, and then, of course, he did mention about the stakeholders, particularly the voters. When I'm talking about inclusiveness, it is not only in terms of the political parties, but it is with regard to the voters. As Brigadier Shekhawat has mentioned, whether they can freely go to polling station and come back and spend the night at home. Spend the night at home. There would not be a knock at the door in the middle of the night and disappear or being raped or humiliated next day. That guarantee, that is the inclusiveness part of it. That whether the voters, and in this respect, despite the fact that people might not be able to define what a good election, and Jeff might have found people say, if I'm not winning, then the election is controversial. But this is also true in case of Bangladesh, that these have been used as an opportunity to send a message to those who are incumbent. I tend to say that in case of Bangladesh, if there is an opportunity, what does actually Bangladeshi voters do when they have the inclusive election? The first thing is that they speak out in the sense that they actually send a message to the incumbent in a very simple manner and somewhat in a very simplistic manner. I tend to say that actually nobody who won the election in Bangladesh, always incumbent lost, because this is their way of making an accountable system. Given the absence of other institutions, which has not been strong in case of Bangladesh, and particularly it has not been, it has, let me put it this way, particularly what has been decimated over the last decade in order to practically create confidence on individual. This inclusiveness part is this. So is it clear to Bangladeshis what inclusiveness and election means? Yes. My own understanding of working on Bangladesh, talking to people on an ethnographic basis, and most importantly, if we look at every election, what it does, the inclusiveness actually makes sure that they can speak out. And in most cases, they've spoken out against the incumbent. Doesn't matter, they could have, if they have the opportunity, if the incumbent had done better, I don't know, they might have. And possibly if there's continued elections, there would have been, the incumbent would have returned. But the point is, this is, or do they know what the actual election, good election means? Good election means that they can speak out. They can, that's why whether it is about winning or losing, that's not the point. The second point is transparency. And in this respect, there's no disagreement with the panelists, and I'm sure everyone agrees on that. Election is not a day thing. Election is about a process, in the sense that there are before the election, pre-electoral period. What do you mean by pre-electoral period? It varies. It varies from country to country. In case of United States, as I see it, we're in a perennial cycle of election. Every day is an election. 365 days, every year is an election day. Because we have this 2 years election, 4 years election, local election is continued. But in case of Bangladesh, the pre-electoral period is a period where we would know that precisely the political process towards the election has started. In most cases, I would say, somewhat at the midterm of any incumbent, about 2.5 years later. First 2 years is basically honeymoon period. In all instances, that has been the case. Honeymoon period goes out, pre-electoral period starts. But more so in recent years, what we have seen is basically election commission's understanding, and a very erroneous understanding of election commission, that as if the pre-electoral period is when the schedule is declared. No, it is not. Actually, election period has started. If the election commissioners have forgotten, they should just read out the newspapers. If they are not willing to read anything, they should watch television. The Prime Minister has been asking to vote her party for last more than 6 months. If there is not an electoral process, what is a pre-electoral process. If a party leader can actually ask, using the state apparatuses, for vote for a political party, then if that is not pre-electoral period, either they're in a hibernation or someone has become Rip Van Winkle in election commission. The third element is, with respect to this pre-electoral campaign, the campaign has started. The polling day is the third element of this issue, as we see that it is not a single day, and of course the aftermath. With respect to aftermath, it is not only about conflict or violence, but most importantly of overseeing that the counting, the acceptability has grown. So as I said, the inclusiveness, the second part is this transparency part. And this is where we see the lack of transparency that we have been witnessing. Previously, at least 4 occasions, they have done a little bit better than others. And that includes, thanks to Dr. Brigadier Shekhawat, who is here, who have been part of the 2008 election process. Accountability mechanism is the one. Can we hold this electoral process, these individuals who are actually running for the offices? Is there a way of accountability? And of course, the competitiveness. 153 being elected. Legally, yes, right. Of course, all of us know legally, yes, it was right. Morally, absolutely not. Morally, you know why? Because as a matter of fact, according to Bangladesh Constitution, one interpretation would be the election of 2014, the rest of the election shouldn't have taken place and didn't need to be taken place. 153 is a majority who can actually form the government. And you could have a government without casting a single vote. So that is where I say that what I mean by electoral integrity is on this issue, on the transparency, accountability, inclusiveness, and competitiveness. Those are the indicators. And in this respect, I humbly disagree with Jeff Van Ness when he says 2008, post-2008 is the situation that we are witnessing. This is not a causal relationship. 2008 election didn't create. It has not caused it. The reason of the authoritarianism that we have witnessed and the rise of the hybrid regime, as I have tried to explain in my book in 2019, immediately after 2018 election, has been, and it is not only Bangladesh, is not an exception. Electoral process are being used by would-be autocrats. But what happens thereafter is the peeling off of the accountability mechanism. And we have witnessed that effort in the United States by Donald Trump to do so. Fortunately, the US system and the institutions were strong enough, not as strong as I thought it would have been. They have been able to rebuff this effort of an would-be autocrat to manage and practically rebuffed it and saved the democracy for the day, at least for the day. We don't know what will happen. And that's why the causal relationship that is being drawn with 2008 election and the subsequent authoritarian tendency of the government. Rather, let us look at how it has been done. What other mechanisms have been used, not only in case of Bangladesh, in case of the Turkey Erdogan, or in case Viktor Orban's in Hungary. So my point is that, with respect to this, the results, the situation that we are in case of Bangladesh is not a result of 2008's fair election. Fair election has produced a parliament, and the Bangladeshi political culture might have prevented, and it's not the first time that actually post-2008 election that opposition had started to boycott. Let us not forget that previously, in another occasion, after another situation, almost 143, if I'm not wrong, parliament members did resign. They were the opposition, led by, at that point, among other political parties, Awami League was that part, Jamaat Islami was part of this. And the day I recall is the resignation submitted by no other than a person who is now dead, and who was the only single member of his party. He led this whole process of resignation, making a dysfunctional parliament. so the electoral integrity issues need to be seen in this way. The second point, the challenges to the electoral integrity.
Ali, if you can just wrap up in the next couple of minutes. Thanks.
Sure. The second thing is the challenge to electoral integrity is that basically 2 points that have come up. One is the constitutional arrangement. There was a reasonably good constitutional arrangement. We are not saying perfect, the reasonably good, which was the caretaker system, which Shekhawat Hussain has mentioned, which has been removed, which created this situation. So within this legal arrangement, this constitutional legal arrangement that we have seen was intended to do so. I don't think it was an accident. I don't think there was any other intention of the regime at that point to make sure, with respect to the 15th Amendment. The 15th Amendment itself, its constitutionality is questionable. That's why the challenge at this point is this electoral integrity is basically, with respect to the constitutional part, is this. The third, what is the current situation? Nurul Kabir has explained it quite well. At this point, what we know for sure, that there cannot be, without the lack of the institution, there cannot be a free and fair election under the current regime. Why? Because of the politicization that Brigadier Shekhawat mentioned. But most importantly, the point is what Nurul Kabir has brought up, the cost of defeat. The cost of defeat for regime, its loyalists, its supporters have become so high. And that is why it seemed to me that one way of guaranteeing an exit to this, if there has to be any conversation, that has to include whether a post-election situation can be created based on rule of law, not rule by law, that, and with the independence of judiciary, that nobody would be actually unduly persecuted. If there is a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which can be supervised by the international community, can be done, that might actually pave the way in some ways, or at least create an incentive for the government, because I agree with Nurul Kabir that the current regime is afraid how they would be dealt with, especially given that they dealt with. So this is the situation that what we see as going forward. Recent events, since the confrontations that we have seen, the violence that has been perpetrated, and subsequently the persecution that we are witnessing with respect to the opposition, is a message from the government. It is a clear message. If that was not heard by anyone, they have made it with this, what they call the sound grenade. The grenades that was lobbed and sounded made it very clear what would be the election look like. Despite the fact that there is a clear consensus. And where is the clear consensus? If not nothing else, let me pick up the recent most IRI survey. 44% people have said they reinstate the caretaker government. 25% said that there should be a unity government. What does that mean? 69% people have said under this system, under this government, there cannot be a free and fair election. Period. There is no other way to put it. Either government would listen to it, or they can simply wait to see. At that point, let me finish with this. There is a role of the international community at this moment. Given it is very clear, they should be engaged more with respect to having, call it dialogue, call it mediated, negotiated settlement. Otherwise, there would be what is coming is not uncertain. In some ways, it is certain that the conflict and acrimony is going to cost Bangladesh quite dearly. Who will bear the brunt? It is the people who will bear the brunt, not the ruling elites. Let me finish there. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ali, and thank you to all of the panelists. Before I get to the questions from our attendees, I'll ask Ambassador Milam if he wants to kick us off, if he has any specific questions he'd like to address to any of the panelists. Okay, while Ambassador Malam thinks about a question, let me try to pull a couple of the different threads in the questions together and address them to our different panelists. And I'm going to paraphrase some of these. So the first one maybe for Brigadier Sakawat. There were several questions that had to do with the role of the security forces, both during the elections and then I think as Ali was just mentioning, this whole issue of fearing retribution for what may have happened over the past years. Can you talk a little bit about the roles of the different security forces, including the role of the Bangladesh Army in getting us through an election period?
Thank you very much. My observation and the way it works. It all depends, as I said, when we had conducted the election, it was under caretaker government. Therefore, everyone who were put on the task, including the security apparatus like police and other forces, civil armed forces who work with the election commission, they were perfectly all right. They did exactly what their duty was. Well, there was some slack here and there, but that was taken care of. But now, the law enforcing agencies that we are talking about police, we are talking about RAB, we are talking about whatnot and others, all civil armed forces. They come under the purview of the returning officer as well as the other officials who are in the conduct of election. Therefore, the law enforcing agency has been highly politicized also, particularly the police and the civil armed forces. The very fact that their behavior, as you see now, and their utterances, almost like political slogan, and unfortunately, the most of the ranks and files have come from the cadre of the ruling party. Remember that it is 15 years that one party stays, and so the party has infiltrated everywhere. Therefore, we have seen the behavior of the law enforcing agencies were absolutely not acceptable for nearer to free and fair election. One of the example was just a few days back, a by-election here inside the metropolitan Dhaka, and where police was absolutely mum when one of the candidates was beaten by the other people. And talking about the army, I'm sorry to say, the armed forces do not have any power when they are deployed. The power lies with the magistrate, because previously armed forces was included in the law enforcing agency definition so that they could take action of their own. But now they cannot take any action of their own unless a magistrate is present or a magistrate is ordered. Therefore, the magistrates are mostly not available, and the armed forces just keeps quiet and sit wherever they are supposed to be sitting. There were in last two elections, many people have told me out of the armed forces that they were just bystander, because they were not asked to do anything whatsoever. So armed forces were deployed just to tell people that the army is also involved. So they become somehow or other part of it. Therefore, I've been talking about most of the time, you have a manual of the deployment, how people should behave and all this. I'm sorry, even the complaints have not been coming to the election commission and have not been dealt properly as it should have been. So finally, I would say that everything is under political control.
Great, thank you, Brigadier. And then for Nurul Kabir, I won't ask you the question about the media. I'll let you off the hook on that, but I'll ask you a question from the perspective of the Bangladeshi citizen. There are several questions about how should the average Bangladeshi citizen react to this situation, both in the period running up to the election and on election day. What would be your advice? You're muted still, sir.
I mean, the last part of the question, please. Would you please repeat?
Well, it's your advice to the average Bangladeshi citizen, how they should react to this situation, both in the run-up to the election and on election day itself.
Oh, sure. Given my experiences in the past and the hopes and aspirations that traditionally the people of Bangladesh have with respect to elections, if the elections is being held under the present regime, people will not go to the voting centers because they would know that the result has already been decided. So they won't have any freedom to choose their own representatives. That's on the one hand. And if the people can at least get some hints that something will happen to take this government out and install something, some kind of an administration, which would allow them to choose their representatives properly, there will be enthusiastic participation, I must say. Elections will be very festive. And if at the present, what is going on, this is for all to see, that the politics has already taken a course of confrontations. Those who are politically active and very seriously committed to the cause of democracy on the one hand, and those, particularly the opposition parties, willing to return to power, they will get a violent day by day. Because as one of our colleagues say, that which is like a theoretical gospel, everybody will agree that ruling parties need to work together. But our experience is they work together only when under serious circumstantial compulsion, particularly existentialist crisis. And perhaps if the situation continues like this, the government continues to display that they are not willing to hold a good elections. Sin will get more violent, and either of the parties will be exposed to existentialist crisis. That's going to be a scenario that I can see.
Great, thank you. And for Jeff, I'll give you a question, which is a combination of several questions that came up about what the political opposition, particularly the BNP, should do. And some questioners referred to this trap that's been set for the BNP. They've had experience of both participating in elections, which then were perceived as not free and fair, and then boycotting elections and being left out. So what advice would you have for the opposition parties?
Okay. First, I want to clarify for anyone who may have misheard me. I don't think the quality of the 2008 election produced the current situation. I think we have the one-party situation despite the integrity of the 2008 election. My concern is that even if we got a high-quality electoral process in January 2028, it wouldn't change the underlying political culture. That's my fear. And if we only get to ask for one thing, I would go with functioning government and opposition over quality election. Both are very important. But I don't think that the voters in 2008 chose political dysfunction. I think the political dysfunction was there. It has lots of parents on all sides. And unfortunately, the events and the efforts that produced a better electoral process in 2008 didn't fundamentally produce a better political culture. And that. So my advice to the BNP, they are in a difficult situation. And I do think that they have made some mistakes in the past over their decisions to participate, or more importantly, not participate in certain processes. You know, I'm really not sure what they should be doing now. They are, I believe, in a weakened position. The consequences are very serious for their members and their supporters. And I definitely subscribe to do no harm principles. But advice I would give to BNP at this point is probably advice that I would give to Awami League. And in fact, it's advice I've given to everybody for many years, is that everybody could benefit from a better understanding of voter decision making. Dr. Riaz brought in inclusion from the perspective of the voters, which is so important, because I think that a lot of times that we talk about elections, we talk about politics, we talk about parliament, we forget to talk about the voters. And that is who these processes are for. It's subject for another discussion, but I often hear people talk about the outcome of elections in the past and in the future being decided by these impersonal forces, whether that is incumbency or anti-incumbency, whether it's this alternation of power, whether it is money and muscle, whether it's vote buying. And too little do I hear people talk about elections in Bangladesh, other countries as well, in terms of the voters decided or the voters made a difference. There have been a couple references to voter turnout. I believe in 2008, it was near a peak at like 85%, and it was wonderful. And I think we can all agree the drop in official voter turnout is worrisome. And then if you add to that concerns about whether or not those voters actually turned out, it's even worse. If I were the Awami League, I'd be very worried about that. It's a legitimacy issue. But my advice to the BNP, my advice to the Awami League and every other political party is, if you pay attention and you work on understanding how voters make up their minds on who to support, when they make up their minds on who they would like to vote for, that you can change the politics in the country. It's the voters. They are influenced by things other than money and muscle. If they were totally influenced by money and muscle, you'd have 100% voter turnout, and we're not seeing that. Information from public opinion research. I used to work with IRI. In 2008, we did exit polls of voters in both the city election and the national election, and we learned so much about what was motivating them on those days. There have been plenty of public opinion surveys nationwide. I'm a fan of studying these things. And my advice to the BNP and the Awami League is to try to think differently about how elections are decided and can be decided, and to focus on the voters and eliminate a lot of the inefficiencies that we see in politics. And I'll leave it at that.
Great, thanks, Jeff. And Ali, we'll give you a softball for the last question. There are several questions, a number of questions, probably the plurality of questions, want to know what the United States will do and what the United States should do, particularly when it comes to using the tool of sanctions, and again, particularly in light of most recent events. So if you can look into your crystal ball and talk a little bit about the role of the United States going forward.
Thank you, John. Since I don't have a crystal ball, and I do not represent the US government by any means, I cannot say what will they do. what normatively what we can say with respect to what should be done at this point, which I have hinted pretty much at the last end of my previous conversation. International community has a responsibility at this point for finding a mediated, negotiated situation to avoid the confrontation, because that is what is going to be, costing the region of stability to begin with, but most importantly, costing the lives directly, and is going to impact the economy and the broader region. That's number one. So what are the instruments that the United States can use? Sanctions have been used, and with respect to Bangladesh, and it's not a general statement about the sanction regime. Targeted sanction in case of Bangladesh have saved lives. Nobody can disagree with that one. When the sanction was imposed on RAB, it actually worked. That it has saved lives if we look at the statistics. So whether United States should think of targeted sanction is a matter of those who are in the policy circles and in the administration. But generally speaking, what I would say with respect to what US should, one thing is this: clearly they're observing the situation as they have indicated repeatedly. And I would like to see that the chain of events that have resulted in 28th of October and subsequently what is happening, what needs to be looked into. And I hope that US and not only United States, but also further the other international partners of Bangladesh should look into. And again, it has become almost incumbent on them. I understand that the fate of the Bangladeshis should be decided by Bangladeshis on the street, in the polling booth, and elsewhere. But there are situations where international community have previously acted, and it is the time for international community to collectively act to ensure that the Bangladeshis can speak their mind. Jeff has mentioned that what the minds of the voters, that is the most important thing. And that is in making sure that process, in a toolbox of the United States, there should be more kind of tools. Sanction could be one, targeted sanction in this instance, but my encouragement would be to not only remain engaged, but robustly engage the international community at this point. I am afraid that this election could become, as I said, the elections are three kinds. This could be the transformative election for Bangladesh. Already Bangladesh has entered into what I described as electoral authoritarianism. It might be the last, the Rubicon that might be crossed, and it could become like Cambodia, essentially a one-party autocracy. Does international community want to sit by and watch it? This is a question I have. Like my colleagues who have raised that question here, I understand a sincere desire to know about. I wish I knew, but what I can do is, raise this alarm bell that this election is not 2014. This election is not 2018. Bangladesh cannot afford to have an election repeat of either 2014 or 18, not because it would only bring the incumbent back to the power, but most importantly, that would be the threshold that Bangladesh would cross with this election. Unfortunately, that's not good for Bangladeshis and not good for the international community. I hope they understand that one. And that includes those who are sitting in Washington and elsewhere. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Ali. And thank you to all of the attendees for your excellent questions. And my apologies that we couldn't get to all of your individual questions in detail. But I think the spirit of all the questions was addressed in the answers from our panelists. I don't know if Ambassador Milam has the ability to come online to say a few words as we wrap up. But Ambassador Milam, over to you.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, we got you now, sir.
Okay. Well, I started to say something the first time when you called on me just a few minutes ago, but I was muted and it didn't, evidently, nobody could see me talking and nobody could hear me talking. That's really being bound up, in very rigorous ways. It's been, I don't want to, actually, it's after 12 and I don't want to continue. I had one thing, I was going to mention something for Mr. Van Ness, and I'll just say it. I don't want to talk about it because we're gonna run way over otherwise. But it strikes me, maybe my history is wrong, but it strikes me that there was a great turn in the sort of wave, the sort of tendency of Bangladesh elections and the way they were run once the constitutional amendment was abolished for the caretaker amendment. And that I struck me at the time that was a big change that was you could see happen. You could really feel it happen. So I think maybe that was more of a motivating factor or whatever you call it, or controlling factor in subsequent elections and subsequent governance than you were that I thought I heard you talking about. But that's all I want to say about that. But anyway, otherwise, it's been a really great discussion. I've actually stayed awake the whole time, so I was not asleep when you called on me before. I want that to be on the record. But thank you, everybody. I've really enjoyed this. I hope you have too. And I hope we can walk away with the idea that we know a little bit, not a little bit, a lot more about what we really don't know about Bangladesh elections. Thank you.
Thank you very
Great,
much.
thank you, Bill.
Thank you all.
And I'd like to also recognize our Executive Director of Right to Freedom, Mushfiqul Fazal Ansari, who's, along with his team, have been working tirelessly behind the scenes to pull this event together and to implement the entire program of seminars over the past year. Mushfiq, I don't know if you have any words of wisdom for us before we close, but I'll hand you the floor as well.
Thank you all for joining with us. Thank you so much, and thank you, John, to moderate this event. Thank you, our President, Ambassador Bill, and all panelists and the attendees. Thank you so much.
Thank you
Great,
all.
thank you. So that concludes today's program. Brigadier, did you have a word you wanted to say?
No. Thank you very much. Thanks once again, and I've learned a lot, particularly from the others. And I wondered, most of them I knew, as I said, Mr. Milam and the other two gentlemen who was in IRI, I believe, if I'm not wrong. I have met him a number of times. Thank you once again for having me in this gathering.
Great, thank you. So as mentioned, today's event concludes our series of seminars funded by the National Endowment for Democracy, but it doesn't conclude the work of Right to Freedom. So I'd encourage all of you to remain in touch with us, with Mushfiq and his team. We will continue to do our bit to promote democracy, human rights in Bangladesh and elsewhere. Please follow us on the web, on Facebook, on Twitter, on our website. We will post the video from today's proceedings on YouTube and on Facebook, and feel free to share today's proceedings with those who weren't able to attend. With that, I will call a close to today's proceedings, and I wish you all the best. Thank you very much.